Bob Dylan is most likely one of the best musicians ever. It's clear that you belong on that list if you are the first singer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature and one of Time's 100 most important people of the 100 years. Fans are still able to enjoy his beautiful music, but the famous singer-songwriter has had problems that some people didn't know about and others have thought about for a long time. These shocking stories were later told by his family, but just now, Bob Dylan's family confirmed the worst. The music business is in a mess because of this breaking news. Some fans are having a hard time believing what they've heard, while others are getting ready for what might be the saddest news of the year. We should check out what's going on in the Dylan home. Bob Dylan was born in Duluth, Minnesota, as Robert Allen Zimmerman, on May 24, 1941. The young Bob would then be raised as a religious Jew in the Musabai Range, which is west of Lake Superior. The family home of Bob's paternal grandmother was in the Kadizman area of Kars province in northeastern Turkey. When there were riots against Jews in 1905, his paternal grandparents, Anna Kurgis and Zygmunt Zimmerman, left Odessa, which was part of the Russian Empire at the time but is now in Ukraine. They came to the United States. Bob was born and raised in the United States. He spent his early years in Duluth, but when he was 6, he moved back with his family to Hibbing, Minnesota, where his mother was born. The family had a simple, happy life, even though the town was small and not very close to anything else. Bob's dad and his uncles on his dad's side ran a business selling furniture and appliances. They had good luck with business because their new location had a lot of different kinds of people who came to work in the mines nearby. Bob's experiences with people from these different cultures would have a big impact on his later years. Bob's life as a child in the Midwest was like the life of any other Jewish child. He even went to Camp Herzl, a summer camp for Jewish Zionists. Besides school and getting his first guitar when he was 10, there wasn't much else to do in the forest surrounding mining town. People at Bob's high school in Hibbing thought he was different and different from the crowd. Besides not being very interested in ideas, he was also a bit shy. As a kid, he would often get lost in his own world, which was helped by the many books he read. Bob soon became interested in music and would listen to the radio for hours on end. As a kid, he was influenced by early rock and roll and blues. It got longer as he added more artists to his list like Little Richard, Elvis Presley, and Buddy Holly. During high school, he played instruments to improve his singing skills, like the piano, guitar, and harp. He started several high school bands by the time he was in his early teens. The Shadow Blasters and the Golden Chords were 2 of them. It got so loud at their talent show when they sang Rock and Roll Is Here to Stay by Danny and the Juniors. The head of the school turned off the microphone. These kinds of things never stopped Bob and his band from playing lively covers of popular rock songs. At the time, Bob's friends remembered how much he loved music and how hard he worked to stand out. At some point, he played piano with Bobby V at 2 different gigs under the name Elston Gunn. People praised how great he was. He was already thinking of leaving Hibbing to make music full-time at this point. His love of music, on the other hand, started to go in a different way. Folk music turned out to be the lucky style, which was a type of music with a lot more stories behind it. Because Bob liked poems and books, this is where he would make his mark. He really liked singers like Woody Guthrie, whose songs were about how hard it was for the average American during the Great Depression. Incredibly interested in Woody and even called him his hero in the end, Bob decided in high school that he only wanted to be a musician. To make his choice even stronger, the comment on his senior yearbook page said, "Join Little Richard." He was still stuck in the small mining town though, and it was clear that he had to leave home to follow his dream. When Bob was done with high school, he got into the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis and began studying there in September 1959. But just like in high school, he never paid much attention to his work, and he didn't stay at the school for long. Which is why Bob decided to check out the music scene in Minneapolis' Dinkytown area instead of going to school. Here, Bob became really interested in folk music, and he began playing in coffee places in the area, and his songs continued to show that Woody was still aware of what was going on in the world. Bob changed his name totally too. He chose the name Bob Dylan, which came from the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. He said that he wanted to pick the name Dylan, but he chose Dylan after finding poems by Dylan Thomas by chance. He said about this name change, "You were born with the wrong parents and names." In the end, that does happen. You can call yourself anything you want. People who are free live here. Bob started singing at the 10 O'Clock Scholar, a coffee shop close to the university, while he was living at the Jewish-themed Sigma Alpha Mu house. Though he only stayed at the University of Minnesota for 1 year before leaving to live in Greenwich Village, New York City. Some people saw this neighborhood as the home of the new type of American folk. He went to the Greystone Park Psychiatric Hospital in January 1961 to play with Woody Guthrie there. Here, Bob chose to learn from his hero. "I mentally noted that I would be Guthrie's best student. Bob became friends with Guthrie and Ramblin' Jack Elliott, who was his apprentice. As of the following month, Bob was playing at bars in and around Greenwich Village. He became friends with folk singers Dave Van Ronk, Fred Neil, Odetta, and the new Lost City Ramblers during this time. He had other friends as well, like the Irish singers Tommy Makeam and the Clancy Brothers. Not only was he teaching these new friends about music, but he was also getting songs from some of them. Bob gave great efforts every time he had the chance. One such event was his show at Jerdy's Folk City in September. Robert Shelton of the New York Times wrote a wonderful review of Bob's work. It was this review that pushed Bob's career forward. Another person who liked him was John Hammond, who was producing the third album by folk singer Carolyn Hester that month. Hammond really liked the harmonica that Bob played on Hester's song. Columbia Records signed Bob that same year, and on March 19, 1962, his first record came out. Talkin' New York and Song to Woody are the only two their own songs. Folk, blues, and gospel songs from the past made up most of the record, but in its first year the record only sold 5,000 copies, which was just enough to pay the costs of making it. Even so, Bob got a management deal with Albert Grossman in August 1962, and he changed his name to Bob Dylan. Bob's first trip to the UK was from December 1962 to January 1963. This was because TV director Philip Saville wanted him to be in his movie Madhouse on Castle Street. Saville wanted the show to air on BBC. So at the end of the play, Bob performed Blowing in the Wind in public for the first time. Another important song by Bob Dylan, Blowin' in the Wind, came out in 1963 with his second album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. This record made Bob famous. There is no doubt that Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie had an impact on some of the songs on the record. The tracks were mostly songs that made you think about how things are. As an example, Bob in Oxford Town talks about James Meredith's time as the first black student to attend the University of Mississippi. The idea for A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall came from the song Lord Randall, and the things the song talked about happened a few days after he started singing it, making it more important. Blowin' in the Wind, the title track of the record, messed with the social and political order. Its melody was influenced by the old slave ballad No More Auction Block. Bob didn't judge or teach in this song. He was actually asking them to think more deeply about how they felt about things like freedom, equality, and peace. People who were involved in the civil rights movement related to this song because it was about their search for fairness and justice. It wasn't long before activists and civil rights leaders played the song at important events like the 1963 March on Washington as an unofficial call for change. After many well-known singers covered the song, it became its own thing. One of the best ones was done by Peter, Paul, and Mary. There was more to Bob now than just writing songs and playing music. Because of the songs that went with the times, he had grown into something more. While some people didn't like the way Bob sounded, that didn't change the meaning or performance of any of the songs. As if sandpaper could sing, Joyce Carol Oates wrote, when we first heard this raw, very young and seemingly untrained voice, frankly nasal, as if sandpaper could sing, the effect was dramatic and electrifying. People couldn't get enough of it. The Beatles were shocked by how many different kinds of music were on Bob's album. We just played it, just wore out, George Harrison said. It was like blowin' in the wind. Lots of Bob's early songs became more famous thanks to other artists like Joan Baez, who became his lover and supporter. A lot of people knew Joan Baez as the Queen of Folk because she had already made her first album. She met Bob for the first time in April 1961 and saw him perform his song With God on Our Side. She told him, "I never thought something so powerful could come from that little toad." If Baez asked Bob to perform with her on stage at the Newport Folk Festival in July 1963, they would start singing together right away. In order to help Bob become famous, Baez taped some of his early songs and often asked him to perform live. Some other bands are the Byrds, the Hollies, Sonny and Cher, and more. In the early 1960s, Manfred Mann and the Association had a lot of success when they played some of Bob's older songs. He never meant for his songs to be used in political talks, but they did. He did have an effect on more than just the civil rights struggle, though. Bob had been a rebel since he was a child, but he always made it clear that he wasn't speaking for anyone else. Still, he was part of a new trend that was different from the normal way of life. His music spoke to a lot of people who didn't like the way things were in society and politics at the time, and kept hope that someone or something would change them. After Bob quit the Ed Sullivan Show in May 1963, he became more involved in politics. During practice, the head of the CBS show Procedures told him that might be defamatory to the John Birch Society, which meant that the song would have to be taken down. Because of the censorship, Bob decided not to show up. His connection with artist Suze Rotolo, whose parents were extreme Communist Party USA members, made things even noisier. Bob didn't care at all. He even put a picture of himself and Rotolo holding hands on the cover of the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan record. After his third record, The Times They Are a Change In, Bob became more interested in politics. The album's song The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll told the story of how young white millionaire William Zanzinger killed black hotel barman Hattie Carroll. Medgar Evers' death was talked about in another song called Only a Pawn in Their Game. Other songs, like Ballad of Hollis Brown and North Country Blues, talked about how the end of mining in rural areas made people angry. Even though the record was mostly about politics, Bob did include 2 love songs, One Too Many Mornings and Boots of Spanish Leather. Young people who wanted to end the Vietnam War and make sure everyone had the same rights used the record as a sort of tool. It told lawmakers and parents in particular that they needed to accept that change or risk falling behind. By the end of 1963, Bob felt that the folk and protest groups were doing too much to let him fly. It wasn't possible to deal with this emotion properly right after John F. Kennedy was killed. Everyone in the country was shocked beyond belief. Even though the whole world could see him, the US president seemed to be dead. Bob was upset when the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee gave him the Tom Paine Award. The next year, on June 9, 1964, Bob put out a tone that was happier. Songs like Motorcycle Nightmare and I Shall Be Free, No. 10 made Bob seem like a kid again. His rock and roll skills were shown on Black Crow Blues and I Don't Believe You, She Acts Like We Never Have Met. His love songs, Spanish Harlem Incident and To Ramona, were more serious. It Ain't Me Babe was a message to Bob's fans who had come to expect him to speak for them politically without being officially called that. With this song, Bob turned down the part. But he knew that some people might have looked up to him because of that. Chimes of Freedom and My Back Pages, his next 2 songs, were love songs. But My Back Pages was more of a joke about a time when he was more serious. There was no doubt that Bob was going in a different musical way, and he was about to face backlash for it. This new direction showed him the way to go with his songs. Bob went from being a folk singer-songwriter to a folk rock pop music star by the end of 1964 and the beginning of 1965. He switched from work shirts and jeans to clothes for Carnaby Street, including pointed beetle boots and sunglasses that he could wear during the day or at night. An English writer wrote, hair so thick that it would make a comb's teeth tensed out of garments so loud that it would dim Leicester Square's neon lights, he looks like a cockatoo that hasn't eaten in days. Bob also upset the media. In one interview, Les Crane was asked about a movie that was going to be made. It was said to be a cowboy horror movie. When people ask, do you play the cowboy? No. I play my mother, he said with sarcasm. Bob's album, Bringing It All Back Home, came out in 1965. It had his first tracks with an electric guitar, which he made with the help of producer Tom Wilson. The first song was a lot like Chuck Berry's Too Much Monkey Business. Some songs, like Subterranean Homesick Blues, were compared to poems, and they are thought to have come before hip-hop and rap. Bob played the harmonica and acoustic guitar along with himself on 4 long songs on the second side of Bringing It All Back Home. As he switched from acoustic folk to energetic rock, some of his fans were shocked. But it made him more respected because it showed he wasn't stuck in one style of music. He changed the songs he was making because of the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. He was always coming up with new ideas because he believed that people changed and were open to it by refusing the status quo. The Byrds made one of Bob's songs electronically, and it went straight to #1 in both the US and the UK, making it one of his most famous songs right away. To his fans' surprise, he played Highway 61 again. They had no idea what to expect from their favorite artist at this point. This record was very different from what he had done before. Bob switched from his calm acoustic style to one with electric guitars, organs, and a full rock band sound. The words were also different. Someone said they were more weird and ethereal and that people could take them in different ways. Going back to Highway 61 was just part of a society that was changing. Bob had decided not to stick to just one type of music, and all 6 of his albums already had music from different styles. Things did not go away after these changes, though. Bob got his first electric set while playing at the Newport Folk Festival, where he had played before in 1963 and 1964. He was with a pickup group led by Mike Bloomfield on guitar and Al Kooper on organ. Bob got off the stage after only 3 songs because the crowd wasn't sure what to think, even though he was the major act. One story says that the folk fans booed Bob when he suddenly and unexpectedly showed up with an electric guitar. Someone else said that the people might have been upset because the set was too short and the sound quality was bad. But photographer Murray Lerner said, I really believe that they were making fun of Bob for going electric. People in the folk music establishment didn't like Bob's show. For 4 days after his trip to Newport on July 29th, Bob was back in the studio in New York making Positively 4th Street. People thought that Bob was criticizing how the people in Newport and the folk community treated him in the song. The song's words were about getting even and being afraid of people. Mike Bloomfield's blues guitar and Al Kooper's organ chords gave the tracks a sound similar to the breakthrough single. Bob was going to do 2 shows in the US, with Robbie Robertson, Levon Helm, Al Kooper, and Harvey Brooks from his studio group to support the album. The crowd booed the group at their first show, which was on August 28th at Forest Hills Tennis Stadium. This happened again at Newport. Still, a lot of people didn't like Bob's modern sound. People seem to forget about the first show at the Hollywood Bowl on September 3rd because the groups got great reviews for their second show. Bob's change from acoustic to electric music was seen by some as a sign of progress and growth. In September 1965, Bob began a 6-month tour of the United States and Canada with the Five Hawks Players, who would later be known as the band. The tour began in Austin, Texas. These tours turned out well. The band's studio work didn't have the same level of success, though. In February 1966, producer Bob Johnston told Bob to record in Nashville with other experienced musicians because it was so bad. Bob agreed, and he brought Robertson and Cooper to the lessons to play. In the same year that those meetings took place, Blonde came out. Cooper said that when he talked about Blonde, Bob Dylan, the classic New York hipster, and the music scene in Nashville exploded into each other. During this time, Bob's personal life was also going through some ups and downs. His 1966 tour made him look and act like he was on a death trip and was very tired. At the time, director D.A. Pennebaker was traveling with the band and said that Bob was taking a lot of amphetamine and maybe some other drugs as well. In a later interview, Bob said, "I was worn out by it. I was abusing drugs and other things to make ends meet, you understand." Bob had a terrible event happen in his life. One of the most important events in his career was a motorbike crash that happened in July 1966. This accident took place near his home in Woodstock, New York, when he was at the top of his fame. It was awful, even though most of the details of the crash are still unknown. Following that, Bob's work and public outings dropped significantly for a long time. He had to stay away from public life in order to improve his health and mental health. It also gave him a chance to think again about his personal life, his work, and his fame. A great deal of talk spread about this break. Some fans thought the break was because he was mentally tired instead of physically recovering, while others thought he had hurt himself badly. At the end of the year, Bob didn't go on tour. No one knew what they were thinking. Then another year went by without a tour. That was 8 years after they hadn't been seen in public very often. For some reason, Bob's time away from the spotlight during this time led to a creative reset. He turned his attention from the protest songs of the 1960s to writing songs that were more personal and thoughtful in the years that followed. In light of Robertson's death, Bob has also had to think about how short life is and the personal costs of achieving his artistic goals. Bob's relationships with the people closest to him have shaped both who he is as a person and as an artist. His family is very important to him, even though they don't get much attention from the press. In 1964, he began dating Sarah Loans, a former model, which was one of his earlier relationships after Baez. They changed rooms at the New York Hotel Chelsea so they could be close to each other. Someone who wrote about Bob Dylan and knew Loans in the mid-1960s, Robert Shelton, says that she had a Romani spirit and seemed smart beyond her years, knowing a lot about magic, folklore, and traditional wisdom. On November 22, 1965, Bob married Loans, who was 25 years old and expecting their first child, Jessie Dylan. One story says that Albert Grossman and Loans' maid of honor were the only other guests. On Long Island, the wedding took place under an oak tree in front of a judge's office. In his autobiography, lead guitarist Robbie Robertson, who was on tour, wrote about getting a call that morning to go with the couple to a courthouse on Long Island and then to a party that Albert and Sally Grossman were throwing at an Algonquin hotel. Some of Bob's friends, like Ramblin' Jack Elliott, say that he denied being married during a chat sometime after the event. It didn't matter because Bob and Loans started living together in Woodstock, New York after getting married. Bob took in Loans' first married daughter, Maria. After that, they had 4 more children: Anna, Samuel, Jacob, and Jesse. After selling their home in Woodstock, the Dylans bought a simple house on the Point Dume Peninsula in Malibu, California, in 1973. They still owned their home in Manhattan, though. At their new home, they began building a big house, which they then fixed up over the next 2 years. During this time, though, the marriage began to show signs of weakness. In April 1974, Bob started taking drawing lessons from Norman Rabin, a painter from New York. After that, Bob said in an interview that the painting lessons had made his marriage worse. "After the first day, I went home, and my wife has never understood me since." That was the start of the end of our marriage. It was impossible for me to tell her what I was thinking or saying because she never knew. Even though this was said, the marriage went on for 3 more years. Some of Bob's most honest writings came from the emotional journey of his marriage. Each song's words had a lot of the same themes, like love, loss, and regret. Bob and Loans split up on June 29, 1977. Putting in a lot of work to keep the media away from his kids. After some time, Bob and Carolyn Dennis, who sang backup for him, had a daughter named Desiree Gabrielle Dennis Dillon on January 31st, 1986. He married Carolyn again in secret on June 4th, 1986, and they got a divorce in October 1992. Their marriage and child were kept a secret until Down the Highway, The Life of Bob Dylan, Howard Sound's book, came out in 2001. Even though Bob's love life went up and down, music always helped him. On June 7th, 1988, he began the Never-Ending Tour. He and his band played about 100 shows a year, which was one of the busiest schedules for artists in the 1960s. Bob had played a lot of shows by the 2010s. The problem was that some of Bob's audience members said his shows were hard to guess. He would often change how songs were put together or how he sang them. Fans can't sing along or even understand the songs. Someone said that his live shows are bad because he changes the best lyrics ever written so much that they are hard to understand, and he doesn't give the crowd much that it's hard to tell what he's doing on stage. Some people say that Bob has only found a good way to show off his huge collection of stuff, because he got news that shocked everyone in 2016 when he was 75 years old. The Nobel Prize in Literature had been given to him. This award wasn't any old one. The Literature Prize was given to a singer for the first time to someone else. Bob was put in the same group as the great writers. A lot of people couldn't believe what was going on. Bob himself didn't go to the event, and he didn't even say anything until a few days later. How amazing! That is a real question for anyone who dreams about things like that. Even in his 70s and 80s, Bob kept performing and putting out music. Also, his never-ending show lived up to the hype. He was traveling almost non-stop. After that, there was the time in 2019 when he almost fell during a show in Vienna. Bob got better though, and the tour went off without a hitch. He shocked the music world in 2020 with Rough and Rowdy Ways, his first record of new music in 8 years. Some people said it was his best work in decades. Rough and Rowdy Ways were at the top of the UK Album Chart's Music Choice Board. Because of this shocking success, Bob became the oldest singer to ever top the charts with only his own songs. He did a 50-minute live stream called Shadow Kingdom, which was all of Bob Dylan's early songs. In the autumn of 2021, his bootleg shows from the spring were shown in New York. His tour company revealed a series of tours that same month. They were called the Rough and Rowdy Ways Worldwide Tour 2021 to 2024. In the news, the trip has been called an extension of his never-ending tour. The trip is set to last until September 20th, 2024. On June 21st, 2024. As part of the Outlaw Music Festival tour, which Bob started, Willie Nelson and other artists played. Few people are brave enough to go where Bob Dylan has gone, and because of that, he has reached heights that few people reach. Bob is still living and running at age 83.